Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel a little bit like a chimpanzee at a zookeeper's convention. I'm here to tell you why I ate the banana. There are several good reasons to teach short selling to MBA programs. The first, and of course the most important, is that they all want jobs in hedge funds, and you have to help them with the interviews. The second one is that anyone in the investment world really does need to learn how to sell, not just how to sell short. The third one is that I think forensic accounting or investigative accounting, like I do professionally, is a lot more fun than the sort of audit accounting or academic accounting that you all do. And the fourth point is, and this is definitely a short seller's comment, short selling provides a moral framework for which to look at publicly filed financial statements. I don't know how much you know about the character of a short seller, but most short sellers, most true short sellers, are very moralistic. The best job a short seller could have would probably be to work for the SEC if it weren't a bureaucratic concern. And they're also paranoid, generally pretty smart, and very specific and compulsive about their work, and individualist and independent. My background is pretty much like your worst MBA student. I had a master's degree, have a master's degree in 18th century British literature from University of Virginia, and I hadn't had math since 10th grade when I was accepted at the UNC MBA program. I was a little concerned about my quantitative skills, so I did the self-study course in accounting and statistics beforehand. And I ended up grading in statistics and doing fairly well in accounting. Although by the end of the program, I wasn't aware how much fun accounting could be. I was pretty much stuck in the credits by the window, debits by the door frame of accounting. When I graduated, I earned a CFA and became a growth stock guy. When my first company collapsed and the executives had lied to me about what the prospects of the company were, I went back and found a CPA friend from business school, and we went through the financial statements. He showed me pretty quickly that I should have known about the collapse if I'd been smart enough to track receivables. From that point on, I was a dedicated follower of accounting. It took me a little while longer to become a short seller, but I was able to hone my skills with Ted O'Glove, a famous stock prognosticator and quality of earnings person. After I started short selling, I found out that there wasn't much written about short selling, and that the community of database short sellers was very insular and wouldn't talk to me or anybody else. And that's when I decided to write the book, From the Cases I Accumulated Short Selling. Abraham Brilloff was the only other person besides Ted O'Glove that was writing about quality of earnings and quality of assets at that point. As a short seller, I was an accounting and information-based short seller, as opposed to an arbitrageur or a hedge fund computer-modeled short seller. There are very specific, different groups of short sellers operating in the markets. The group of people that I was kin to were a very small group, maybe under 20 people. That group isn't any larger today than it was then. At that point, I retired and quit following stocks completely. Peter Easton's kind invitation got me interested to go back and talk to people and find out how financial credibility and company accountability had changed since Enron and WorldCom and HealthSouth. I called up all my old contacts and friends and did pretty significant interviews for several months, and I'm here to tell you what I found out from the hedge fund people and the short sellers and the analysts in the business. But first, what I'd like to do is run you through some of the trail signs that I look for in a short sale. All of these things are going to be pretty punk to you all as accounting professors. Then I'll run through a couple of 10 examples that I brought, some 10 Qs that I think are a lot of fun. And then we'll go over the current environment. Your discipline as accounting professors is very elegant and elaborate and complex. The accounting I did as a short seller is a short form of classical accounting. It was based on speed, and it was an attempt to try to figure out quickly what the business of a company was and whether the business plan was seaworthy. A great short sale candidate is a company with no cash flow, no assets, bad business plan, huge float, high stock price, and very sleazy management. But of course you can't always get what you want. Short sale analysis, therefore, focuses on quality of assets, quality of earnings, and quality of management. Quality of assets, let's start with the balance sheet. What you're looking for when you run through a balance sheet as a short sale analyst is defined assets that are unbankable, that will blow up and kill the company and or kill earnings. Because I should say at the outset that short sale candidates are not negative or not earnings surprise companies. Because short selling is so risky, we're primarily looking for companies that are going to go away. We want very bad companies, not just a very bad quarter. Typically, most of the short positions I held lasted over 2 years. Many as much as 10 years. So you have to be confident that the company is deeply flawed to take a position for that length of time. We'll talk a little bit more about the quarterly earnings surprise phenomena later. But I repeat, most short sellers were not interested in just one bad quarter. Okay, so what we do at first is look at the asset side of the balance sheet, and we're looking for unbankable, fuzzy assets, or assets that are dependent on the welfare of another company. A good example would be Jiffy Lube. Jiffy Lube, I think they're still around, is an oil change franchisee. They franchised people to run oil change garages. If you looked at the balance sheet, you would have seen that almost everything on the asset side of the balance sheet was totally dependent on the franchisees. They had long-term receivables, short-term receivables, and centers held for resale. As the company tipped over, that number became larger and larger until, with a book value of 180 million in assets were dependent on franchisees. That told you, as a short seller, that what you needed to watch was the franchisees. You would have seen an ad in the Wall Street Journal if you were short the stock that read, "Entrepreneurs of all sizes, grab the Jiffy Lube opportunity. No money down for owner-operators." If you owned the stock at that point, you certainly would have sold it if you were paying attention. And if you were short it, you would have added to positions. What that ad meant was that Jiffy Lube had too much money. A couple years after I was short the stock, I found out that one of the people I went to school with was actually the banker for Jiffy Lube. And he admitted that his bank, which will go unnamed, was very, very happy to make loans to Jiffy Lube, as their investment banker was too. And so Jim Hinman, the head of Jiffy Lube, was more than happy to further his empire. So as much money as he got, he loaned out to potential franchisees to open stores. So the stores multiplied, and they were without financial viability. Boston Chicken is another example of a company where the balance sheet gave you clues that there were problems. Many of the lines on that one were also franchise related, but the main clue was one that you couldn't find on the balance sheet, and that was off-balance sheet lease facility to finance franchisees as well. And so not only was the balance sheet top-heavy with assets from the franchisees, but the off-balance sheet liabilities were huge. The only really good clue on that stock was that the return on invested assets were single digits. And the stores didn't seem like they should be making very good money. But that was a good example of murky disclosure for a very large company. Other examples of unbankable assets are goodwill, deferred anything, securities not marked to market, real estate at inflated values, capitalized anything. For instance, one company, J. Billner's, once capitalized their Christmas party. In the current market, I would think at some point one of the issues with accounting firms is going to be how they mark to market all of these securities, private equity securities, all the funny things that are going around, how they get a value on the balance sheet for those assets. The next area on the balance sheet you look at is receivables and inventory. And receivables and inventory used to be an absolutely fantastic way of getting a clue that there was going to be a problem in the short run. Growth and it's an easy thing to track, as you all know. You look at the growth in receivables and inventories year over year to take out the seasonality versus growth in sales and cost of goods. Nowadays, computer programs track this one, and so a lot of the larger hedge funds that aren't true short sellers were short in front of an earnings announcement because of these two ratios. So it's not as reliable as it used to be, but it's still a good thing to watch. In the old days, LA Gear was a tennis shoe company, and they've been particularly good at taking care of inventory. Inventory was never up by more than cost of goods. The quarter when it was up a little bit more was the time to short the stock. The quarter after it was up, inventories were up 156%, and cost of goods were up 33%, and the stock collapsed. There's an interesting receivables case that's a current one, and it's also a current topic, and that is the for-profit education companies. Career Education is the name of the company, and it was a very, very hot growth stock. Cash flow was perfect, and receivables were only about 20 or 30 days. A lot of people owned the stock. The business of the company was Title IV programs. In other words, high school students that needed subsequent training and schools would be reimbursed by the government was their main business. The thing that most of the owners about this company didn't find out was that the government method of reimbursement is to reimburse same day for the second semester of a student on the first day of school, which means no receivables. So 30 days of receivables was a lot. And for the people that found that out, they were rewarded when subsequently it was announced that they were enrolling students fraudulently. And that was the reason for the high receivables. Another example was Oracle. Oracle had a line called unbilled receivables on their balance sheet. When too many analysts questioned them about the topic, they removed it from the balance sheet and aggregated it in with gross receivables. The stock collapsed at any rate a couple quarters after that, and some employees stated that the company had been stuffing the pipeline for a long time. Oracle, I think recently has also had some problems, and I'm not sure if they're receivables related, but the CFO resigned. Typically in companies like this, you'll see the same problem surface over and over through the years. The third balance sheet area that's particularly lucrative is reserves and depreciation. Trends will tell you a lot about the business environment. We'll look at a subprime lender in a minute and talk about reserves. But under-reserving, over-reserving, or reserve reversal to augment earnings tell you a lot about the company. There was one toy company that had built up a huge reserve during good seasons because they expected when the fat of the toy declined, they would be able to insulate earnings for quarters by reversing the reserve into the earnings. And the shorts knew that, and they followed the line very carefully together with the new toy entrance. The only problem was the good times didn't come quite as rapidly as expected, and they ran out of the reserve. and they had several quarters of very, very bad earnings. And that was an easy one to track from the financials. The liabilities are clearly the other section of the balance sheet you look at, and that's become an increasingly difficult section to follow. Most of the disclosure is in the notes on that. And debt covenants, off-balance sheet liabilities, and contingent liabilities are all very important. Again, when we look at the REIT in a minute, you'll see how important that is. The next section, quality of earnings, is a very critical area. I think they tried to teach me this part in business school, maybe in IM, but I certainly didn't pick it up. You can't always tell what the business of a company is until you look carefully at the financial statements. For example, mailboxes, the company that has the stores that send out packages. Their business is not sending packages. It's opening stores. It's another franchisor. Marriott's another example. Their business was not really running hotels. It's opening hotels. You can see both of those things from looking at the financials and going line by line down the lines of income and looking at the gross margins and how the gross margins relate to operating earnings. The next section that's important on the income statement are non-reoccurring earnings. And this is still a line that can be well hidden in many, as you all know, in many different parts of the income statement. SG&A can be lower than normal because the company has stuck a gain on sale and something there. They can also, Morrison Knudsen's a great example. They were supposed to be in the construction business, but they always had a line on the income statement that ran other income. And if you went to the footnotes, you would have found that other income was gain on sale, interest, and dividends on securities. That lasted for about 3 years of the Bill Cunningham turnaround. The board was shocked when the company defaulted on debt. Their base business faltered badly, and they had no other income to support the interest structure of the company. Reversals can go on for a long time in this area on the income statement. L.A. Gear once booked deferred advertising that hadn't been spent and added it to earnings. Also, obviously, reversals for bad debt. Dell Computer was big on currency gains. They put hid currency gains in the income statement, and most of the earnings growth back many years came from that. A reduced interest line may also be a net amount with a gain on sale hidden there. So it's always important to present all of the items on the income statement to see if there's a radical difference in interest income, depreciation. Any of those things have changed in magnitude, they may be masking a gain. The third section, quality of management, used to be a lot easier than it is today. We used to be able to do things like look at the income of management versus of the income of the company. And if management was making about the same amount as the company was, we thought they were overpaid. That's certainly not the case anymore. If management doesn't have a healthy pay package with a golden parachute, then it's not good management, right? If they don't have an airplane, if they don't have their apartments paid for, it's not a company you want to own. But you still need to read the proxy, follow the 144s, and of course look at all the disclosure in a prospectus if you can get it. What you're looking for predominantly are self-dealing, past performance, overpayment. I won't even touch on options since people seem to disregard them so completely right now. Crazy Eddie had one of the best management groups I've ever seen. The family paid for themselves for everything. They even funded a family-owned medical school in San Lucia out of the company. Stevie Hilbert of Conseco was also one of my favorites. Short sellers get very, very involved in the management of the company they're short because, as I said, they usually look for very sleazy management. And the disclosure can be quite fabulous. The Tyco guy with the shower curtain, for one. But Stevie Hilbert, that was the stock that I think I was short for 10 years off and on. And I knew much better than I would like to ever know, including all those blue book financials for the insurance companies. But after we'd been short Conseco for a while and kicked out of many meetings, we found out that Stevie had married the stripper that had jumped out of the cake at his son's bachelor party. It didn't do much for the stock, but it made us laugh. He's still married to her. Her name's Tommy Sue. The prospectus is also a good place to find felonies, lawsuits, all that sort of problem is pretty well detailed in a prospectus. One of my favorite companies, it was the last one that I could not borrow, and I can't even remember the name of the company now. I read in the prospectus before I went to the due diligence meeting that the chief executive had been the prior chief executive of a company called Cardio Pet. Cardio Pet was a company I could not borrow either, but I followed it with great interest. The business plan of Cardio Pet was to diagnose the heart condition of your animal. You called into Cardio Pet and gave them your charge card information, and then you held the phone up to the heart of the animal. But that brings me to a central tenet of my short analysis, and that is that most human beings are one-trick ponies. We know how to do one thing, and we do it over and over and over again. And this is very true of chief financial officers. If you find a chief financial officer that's cooked the books one way, he'll do it at every company that he works for. It's the only thing he knows how to do. So that's why prospectuses are so, and now we've got Google. We can get their history pretty readily, right? We can find out, even if the company's name's changed, what the executives have done in the past. So do monitor the past and look for the arrest record. Let's go through the cases I have for you. Escala's the first one. I gave you a stock price change and a 10Q, and I'll show you how short sellers look at financials. This one's a fun one. Escala's a stamp auction company. If you picked up the balance sheet on this one, just without knowing anything at all about the company, you would have scanned down the lines and you would have seen that inventory was very, very large as a percentage of assets, 93 million, right? And you'd see that there was an interesting line for related party receivables. Small, but still related parties. And you would have also seen a lot of questionable lines on the asset side for loan receivables and goodwill, things that were unbankable. You also would have noted that liabilities, current liabilities, were way up in the quarter. So what would that tell you as a short seller? It would say, find out how they value inventories. What's their inventory? What's in it? How did they get that number, particularly if they're a stamp company? And it would have also suggested to you that you need to look at the notes and find out what the related party is. Okay, let's flip to the income statement next. Wow, that's a huge line for sales trading, isn't it? But then you look down at cost of sales trading and you say, that's a very tiny margin, which doesn't surprise you. You'd think the auction business would be a pretty small margin. You move to sales of inventory related party and do the same exercise, and you see that gross profits from related parties is about 70% of their operating profits. In other words, the business of this company is the related party. That's the underpinnings. That's all you have to know. To sell the stock, certainly. To short it, you'd want to know a little bit more. If you went to the, if you read the body of the prospectus, which I hope you will because it's a terrific document, you would find that the related party was a Spanish company, that a Spanish company guaranteed all their debt and owned stock and did all the related party transactions. So as an owner or a short seller, you would have tried to get the financials on that company and follow it. This information was probably enough to short the stock. The other thing that you would have, I think, would have caught anyone's eye is the size of the auction market. When you saw the number for sales trading, you would have immediately tried to go to the web or some other source to find out how big the industry was. That's a pretty big number for stamps, it seems to me. And one of the people, the person I got this idea from, was short the stock, and he said that their annual volume was larger than the philatelic market. Is that the way you say it? Philatelic, the stamp market for the year. So that would have told you something was very funny with this one. Let's see. An announcement came out, you can look at the stock price on this, on November 23rd, with allegations that Escala had mishandled funds invested by the Ohio Bureau of Workmen's Comp. That was not mentioned at all in the subsequent financials. Apparently, Escala had marked up coins bought on behalf of the Ohio agency, and the investigation, as I said, was undisclosed. On June 5th of 2006, there was an announcement that Afenza, the Spanish company, sold stamps to investors and promised to pay them a guaranteed annual return. They used the money of other investors to pay that return. In other words, it was a Ponzi scheme. The inventory valuation was an entirely fake number that supported the Ponzi scheme. So stamp valuation was the key with this one. Okay, one more. Let's do Novistar. Novistar is a name that's been in the news a little bit lately. A little bit of background on short selling and real estate. Most old short sellers, and there aren't very many old ones, but there are a few, we're short Texas real estate, Arizona real estate, New England real estate, so we've all been around. I mean, we used to go, back in the days of Arizona, we used to literally fly out and count cranes to see what was going on in the construction business, to know if it were time to short the stock. And when we knew a bubble was in the works, we would have all the names of the lenders and know what the portfolios looked like so that we could put on shorts when the time came. The Arizona market was a particularly lucrative one, but it was followed rapidly by the New England collapse. And so we were able to move to the East Coast pretty quickly. So when I started reading all the stuff in the paper about the impending doom in the subprime market, which was, what, a year ago or something like that, when people started talking about a real estate collapse and possible defaults and problems, it almost got me to go back to the business. Real estate's just so much fun to short. So I got this. Naturally, when I called around to hedge funds, they mentioned the subprimes, and I could hardly wait to read some of the financials to see what you could find quickly. And Novistar, I thought, was a particularly nice one. This Novistar is a specially financed company in residential non-conforming loans. They originate, purchase, sell, invest in, and service loans. And they're also a REIT, so that's different. So, if you own the stock, and the press talks about potential for default and problems with spreads in the subprime market, you'd start watching delinquencies, right? you'd start paying attention to the financials as they came out. Okay, this June 30th, 06, Q is well in advance of the collapse in this market. If you look at the stock price chart, you can tell exactly what the timing was. But as a short seller, here's what I did when I read down the balance sheet. First of all, you see that mortgage loans held for sale or held in portfolio are much bigger than the December Q, as is the debt associated with those loans. So my reaction was, maybe it's because they're waiting for a pool to sell. Maybe it's just a timing thing rather than a fundamental change in the company. The income statement reflects the same thing, higher interest income and interest expense. But that also means the company is taking more risk for not much more income. Reading down the income statement, you also see that provision for credit losses is way up. But it may be because they're holding more on the balance sheet. Gain on sale of mortgage assets is down, but it could be because they're carrying more and they just haven't sold it yet. So the income statement and the balance sheet raise some questions, but they don't give you that many concerns. What you do is you flip to the other income had also tripled on that one, which is an interesting one. Sequentially and year over year, income from continuing operations was down too. So all of that makes you a little bit antsy about the housing cycle and the credit cycle. You go to note 3 in the disclosure. And note 3 gives you the allowance and tells you that as a percentage, it's moved from 2.3 to 0.4%. So that's troubling. Note 5 discloses, when they talk about impairment on mortgage securities, that the decline was other than temporary. So they recognized impairment of $6.5 million in 6 months versus $1.7 million a year ago. That suggests that the decline is not just a timing problem, but that it's set in. Note 9 is the real keeper. That's the one that you'll salivate to look at in the next quarter. 10Qs are very important things for short sellers. It's like Christmas whenever you get a new one. To get to read the notes is just a whole lot of fun. Commitments and contingencies on note 9. It says they sold $793 million in 6 months of mortgages with recourse for default. It gives you the size of the loans that can come back and bite the equity on the balance sheet. It says the reserve is $1.8 million on that $793 million, and that they've had to buy back $8.8 million. That tells you to watch that number. It's very, very important. An increase in it would cause you to double your position, surely. If you flip to the industry section, it tells you exactly what we already talked about. The spreads are narrower, the housing market is shaky, the subprime market is expected to be much worse for the year. It's a very honest picture of what this industry looks like. Net, all of this says pay attention. Things are changing. So, when you get the September 30th balance sheet, you're even more excited to see what's happened here. For the first time on the balance sheet, you see that they have an allowance for doubtful accounts, and it's much, much bigger. They didn't have that the last quarter. Short sellers are very big on reading Qs side by side to see what's changed, literally to see every line of new verbiage in the sections, and also new disclosure in the statements. On the income statement, interest expense from asset-backed bonds has doubled and seems very large indeed. The credit loss provision is up sequentially and year over year, and income is down again sequentially and year over year. When you flip to note 3, that note that we looked at last time, you see that there's a whole lot of new disclosure. There's a new allowance line under held for sale that suggests portfolio deterioration, and a new expanded allowance for credit loss table. And then you go to note 9, which is the note that we really like the best. And that says that the 793 of recourse mortgages is up to $1.5 billion. That's a pretty hefty amount in a deteriorating market that they can be forced to buy back. And the reserve is now up to $4.7 million, with 15.9 bought back. The industry overview has 2 new paragraphs, and it has a pretty lengthy section on how this company now might have questionable REIT status. They've changed the way that they do business, which changes the taxes, and potentially the REIT status may be in question. That's also pretty significant for the price of the stock. And all of that's in the publicly filed financial statements. In both of these cues, you'll see that the financial statements give you the clues to read the verbiage, and the verbiage give you all the information you need to know about the business of the company and the climate in the industry for that business. You don't have to go to any other sources than those financial statements. Okay, let's talk about the current state of short selling. This is kind of some fun stuff. When I started this research, I thought, because of Enron and HealthSouth and Conseco and WorldCom, that everything would have changed. And that there'd be a lot of smart analysts that paid attention to footnotes and read things carefully, and that it would be a whole new world in investing out there. I was a little naive. Let me just run through some of the things I found out from talking to all the hedge funds. And part of this is just totally subjective, but it's a consensus of some people. The first one related to that topic is that most people seem to think that fear was the only motivator in this world. And if we weren't seeing the huge, large-scale frauds that we did around 2000, it was only because the CPA firms and the law firms and the investment bankers were now afraid of litigation and jail, that they'd suddenly gotten religion and were paying a little bit more attention to the financials of the very big companies. Most people agreed that they weren't seeing large-scale frauds like we used to. All of these companies took a long time. WorldCom, Conseco, and Enron, all of them took a long, long time to build up. Most of us were aware that there were problems with these companies years and years before they blew up. Now, everybody in the short world, I think, knew about Enron for a long time before that one happened. I was never short WorldCom, but I certainly knew Bernie Ebbers was cooking the books with acquisitions. It was hard to go to a meeting and not know that. HealthSouth, I was never short. I followed it for years and years, and again, I knew that the numbers weren't right. It didn't smell right, and it probably had to do with acquisitions. Conseco, as I said, I was short years and years and years too early, but it was clear for anybody that talked to the CFO or Stevie Hilbert or looked at the financials or the insurance books that there was fraudulent activity there. CUC International, another one, that guy I saw just paid a relatively small fine and got off pretty easily, I think. I was short that stock about, 15 years ago. He did the same thing on a small scale. Stock got punished, and everybody forgot about it. So he did the same thing on a larger scale, and it was fraudulent, and they got punished, but I don't think that many people were short that stock. Those guys were really, Walter Forbes was his name. He was very, very smart and very good with words, and I think a lot of people were afraid to short that because they didn't think that they understood he convinced them that they weren't smart enough to understand the financials. The troubling ancillary to this fear of lawsuits is that I think it's changed the way that the media responds to bad stories about the press, and answered the questions themselves and didn't take any from the floor, which is essentially what everybody was doing anyway. Okay, so if a company reported bad earnings, the short sellers would finally ask at the end of the call for disclosure on if they reversed a depreciation line, or if there was a gain of sale, or what had happened to the margins. And if it were bad enough, somebody like Greenberg or Alan Abelson or Floyd Norris would pick up the story and write a column on it. If they didn't, and it continued to get worse, the shorts would keep braying and talking and annoying, and conference calls, and we all went to all of the Montgomery conferences and every due diligence meeting and every investor conferences, and we'd raise our hands and say, how about that gain on sale? How about that business plan? And the information got disseminated slowly through the system. And so that the earnings surprises seemed to work. They weren't off a cliff, but they were an ebb down. This fear of lawsuit thing that's run short sellers out of the business, the overstock situation, is in essence silenced the press. You don't see people making negative comments about companies much anymore. From what I hear now, when a company reports earnings, all of the analysts have the inventory and the receivables programs. And what that means is that they've got a ready pattern of what went wrong with earnings. And the company, if they missed earnings, the analysts will say, the worst is over, it's all downhill from here, management knows what's wrong, they've fixed it, this isn't a problem. So there's a tacit conspiracy between the analysts and the company and the stockholders to omit the problem, to overlook it. The subprime world is kind of a good idea. I mean, that was it's a good example. I mean, that was in the works for a long time, and nobody really wanted to talk about the impact on the stocks, despite the fact that there were all of these things going on in the financial statements. So I think that that's changed the price pattern of stocks. The second reason for this phenomena could be the liquidity problem. There's so much money, and all of these funds have to own stocks that they don't want to know if there's a problem because they have to own the stocks. Probably a combination of this has contributed to the change in impact on short-term negative news. The other big change in short selling, which we've talked about pretty much all day, is the negative rebate situation. Probably most of you all don't know that in the old days, not only did we not have to pay to borrow stock, but we got paid huge percentages for the credit balances in our account. During the glory days when interest rates were high, you could get 10 or 12% on the credit balance of your account, and you didn't have to pay to borrow it. So that was a good starting point if you were a short seller. It put the wind at your back and changed the returns dramatically. I heard a lot of complaint from short sellers about negative rebates, but the other side of that is that it means that borrowing stock is now a business for brokerage firms. It's now a profit center, so that they solicit stock to borrow from their institutional accounts, so there's much more stock to borrow. Of the funds that I talked to, nobody had been bought in years, and we used to be bought in every day. Back in the 90s, you got a small buy-in on any position, no matter what size fund you were, almost every single day. And nobody's been bought in on for years. They may have to pay a negative rebate, but the negative rebate obviously also changes the risk-return profile. Since short sellers are notoriously bad about timing, everything always takes 2 more years than you think it will. That really affects how you position your fund, and it probably forces short funds to have more longs to offset the impact of that charge. The other obvious change in short selling is that there's so much, it's another liquidity thing, there's so many hedge funds with so much money. Most of those hedge funds, and this surprised me, aren't doing fundamentally based short selling. They're doing either negative earnings surprise work, or they're doing the positive alpha work, computer models, arbitrage, all sorts of things. But there aren't very many people doing in-depth short research. There's still the same 10 or 20 people. They may be bigger, but the market's bigger. For your all's purposes, what makes it so hard is you can't spread out in your research. Do research on this market, you can't spread it out. You have no idea of knowing who the few smart guys are and who the rest of the MBAs with a computer program are. So it makes it very hard to do statistical work on it. The next problem I heard, mostly from the younger guys, was that private equities have killed short selling. That you couldn't very well short stocks when private equities had so much money and they were buying everything that was a problem. As I said, these were the younger guys. I lived through the days of LBOs, and if you are a short seller, your catechism was, times earnings, times book, times cash flow. You always had a buyout valuation in your head on paper in front of you, high, low, based on anything you could. Because one of the big risks in short selling is that there are a lot of dumb companies around that'll spend a whole lot of money on a bad company. So you have to know your valuation. The good thing about the private equities is at some point maybe they'll monetize them, and then we'll have a lot of new picks to short. Prospectuses are always good. IPOs are always great. The other big change, and this is, I think, a critical one that has changed a lot about the markets, and that's the fee structure of hedge funds. It used to be 1% maybe for management, sometimes no percent, and 20% of profits. Now it's up to 3.5% and 35%. It used to be that most of the hedge funds had a hefty percent of general partner money in them, and they had a general partner. So the guys that ran the funds were playing with their own money. That's changed. They're now limited partnerships with not near as much exposure, and many of the hedge fund guys don't have very much money in them. They're playing with other people's money. That makes a huge difference in the sort of risk you take and the profile. The 3.5% makes a huge difference in whether you put on positions at all. Some of the bigger funds that have big reputations and are very good at marketing can afford just to take the 3.5% and leave on their jet planes. They don't have to invest. They don't have to be short much stock or long much stock. You can replace disgruntled investors every year with new ones. These fund-of-fund guys aren't terrifically adroit at looking past the media and the reputation of the people that run the funds. All of this brings me back to the cycle. One study that I read said that 60% of short profits are made in 10% of the time. Short selling is a very, very risky business, and you usually don't make any money doing it at all. It's very, very, very company specific, and the market is the primary, the psychology, the liquidity, which is the market, are the primary movers of stock price. But despite all of that, short sale analysis remains a very useful skill to know. It makes you look at things different. It makes you look at the stocks you own, and it makes you look at when to sell them. You as accounting professors, I think, can do a lot about the short world. You can publicize new red flags if you see them, new accounting scams, new things people are doing. Most Wall Street analysts really can't do accounting. They could use all the help they could get. You can also help track who's got the risk in the debt arena. Try to figure out if there's disclosure for risk and where it is, and teach people how to track it. You can teach your students that reading financials is fun. You can give them sets of Q's and K's that are like treasure hunts so that they understand how much fun it is to look for sleaze and deterioration and to be smart enough to see things that other people don't. So I would like to recommend to you, give you some very concrete recommendations here. I think you should make all of your accounting students use clicky pencils rather than computers. It helps to get your hands on the numbers. Every time you use a computer, you miss what's going on. Your ability to look at companies is dependent on how many financials you've looked at. So, burn the computers. It's going to be popular. Next, you can teach them to read the risk sections. And then again, give them case studies that are fun. I don't know why you can't give them one set of short case financials to read through in a class. You can also teach them that an accountant's job is to publicly disclose the health of a company, not to obscure the greed of management. That's something that I don't think most MBAs are aware of. And you as the elite, you can open the door to the chimpanzee cage. You all could actually talk to Wall Street people and find out what's going on. One of you, who knows, might want to become the next Abraham Brilloff and actually write important articles he wrote on pooling and purchase and things like that, but he made a huge difference in the investment world by being a brilliant accountant that was fearless. You can also give up regression analysis and read financials. That chance, huh? You can search out the hidden leverage and corrupt cash flow in the companies when you find them. And you can embrace the morality of your discipline. Okay, I'll take questions.